What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and today we're looking at the best way to spend 20 bucks in Guilds of Ravnica Standard with literally the best budget mono-white aggro deck in a really long time. Years, in fact. So let's get after it. Let's check this thing out. Now, if you want a strong game one, or maybe you're just playing like best of ones on Arena or something, and you want a way to spend those common and uncommon wildcards, this is definitely a deck you might want to check out. And it's my kind of aggro deck, you know. This deck plays more one-drops than it does lands. How cool is that? And we play more creatures than some decks play, you know, non-lands in their entire main deck. So that's pretty awesome too, you know. But that said, if we're going to get through this massive creature suite, gotta go ahead and get started. This deck plays 23 one-drop creatures, which sounds crazy, but we want to not only guarantee a one-drop on turn one, which we have pretty much done, but very often we want two one-drops on turn two. We want to develop our board as quickly as possible, and that's going to involve playing some creatures that look a little bit weird. But bear with me here, because we're playing 4 copies of Healer's Hawk and 3 copies of Rustwing Falcon, believe it or not. I know it looks like we're playing like Bird Tribal here, and how good could that be, but actually early flyers are pretty good in this format. They're a reliable source of damage in the very early game. And we have a couple of different ways of making these bigger in this deck. So sometimes these can do like 5-6 damage before it's all said and done. And for just the 1-mana investment, that is huge. So, and both of these obviously have advantages of their own. Healer's Hawk has the lifelink, and if we make it any bigger, it stands to gain us a bunch of life over the course of a game, and that can actually be really swingy in sort of aggro mirrors. So keep that in mind. But Rustwing Falcon has the 2 toughness, which is really important against, you know, Chain Whirler and Fanatical Firebrand right now as well. But don't think we're done. We're not even sort of done with the one-drops. We're also going to play 4 copies of Sky Marcher Aspirant in the deck, which can also have flying very late in the game, but we're actually not going to be getting the City's Blessing as often as a lot of these mono-white aggro decks want to get it, because we're not playing Legion's Landing in this budget build. I didn't want to lean too heavy on Ascend in this build, but that said, Sky Marcher Aspirant starting on like turn 5 some of the time will have City's Blessing, and that can be great for putting the game away. Just getting another flying creature on turn 5, 6, whatever, can sometimes actually make an enormous difference. And if nothing else, it's a 1-mana 2/1. It's very, very aggressive, and I want to play as many of these, you know, 2-power 1-drop creatures as we can. So that's why we're also playing 4 copies of Dauntless Bodyguard. Sometimes this thing's ability to like jump in front of removal, make something indestructible, will be important. Not gonna lie, you know. There are sweepers like Deafening Clarion, and obviously cards like Goblin Chain Whirler. And being able to play a Dauntless Bodyguard and say like, oh no, my Aspirant's not gonna die later on, or, you know, my Adanto Vanguard's not going to die later on, and I'm not going to have to pay for life, you know, can actually be a really important thing to be able to do. But again, mostly, this is just an aggressively statted creature, and that's why it's going in the deck. Same thing with Leonin Vanguard. It takes a little bit of work to make this a 2-power creature, but with 23 1-drops, we're going to be attacking with 3 dudes as early as turn 3 in just about every single game, so it's not very hard to make Leonin Vanguard a 2-power creature for just the 1 mana. But to finish off the 1-drops, didn't take as long as I thought it would, actually. We're going to play 4 copies of Hunted Witness over here, because this is great against, again, various sweepers, you know, Deafening Clarion, and even Fiery Cannonade is something we kind of have to worry about in games 2 and 3 now. And this is just going to replace itself with a better creature if they happen to kill it. And by the way, all this like incidental life gain that we're seeing, you know, like this leaves a lifelink guy behind. We got Healer's Hawk in there, it's got lifelink. The only Vanguard will gain you a life sometimes. Like, all of this will matter. Not only for a card in the sideboard, but just period, you know, in aggro mirrors and stuff. Sometimes that little bit of extra life gain will make all the difference. But we're playing precisely 1 2-drop creature. It's actually 4 copies of a 2-drop. Anyway, we're playing 1 creature in the 2-drop slot. And that's the 4 copies of Adanto Vanguard. If we had to choose 1 2-drop, this is the best one in Standard. He said confidently. Actually, I think that it's up there. It's at least in the top 3 2-drops in the entire format right now. This is great against, obviously, Deafening Clarion, but any removal. We don't care too much about our life total in the majority of matchups. We're trying to win the game as quickly as possible, and our life total is a resource in that situation that we're more than willing to use, you know? If this can survive a lava coil or a shock or a lightning strike or whatever, you know, anything other than exile-based removal, and keep on swinging, that's exactly what we want. This reliably does 6 or 9 damage over the course of some games. But we're making room for 4 copies of Benny Mars in the deck. The only actual 3-drop technically in the deck. You'll know what I mean in just a second, but in my opinion, we absolutely have to play this card. It's only like $1.50 right now, so even with a $20 budget, we can easily fit this thing, and it's just about the single most important card for the deck, period. I have seen some lists that aren't playing this, you know, they stop at the 2-drop slot, and although that's neat, and it lets you play like 16 lands, I don't get it. Again, you know, this is just maybe the most important card we could possibly play, and it's really cheap to do so. And it makes playing, you know, Healer's Hawk and Rustwing Falcon and Hunted Witness like much, much more worth it than it would otherwise be. You know, sometimes this will come down the turn it enters the battlefield and have this huge impact on the game and just lead to 3 or 4 extra points of damage during the combat step. But once it actually does get swinging, if your opponent can't do anything about it, this leads to a huge bump in damage during your, you know, 4th turn. And it forces Settle the Wreckage on them. It forces Deafening Clarion. If they don't have cards like that, they're going to be in a huge amount of trouble. But another finisher, really, that I think we need to play a full playset of is Venerated Loxodon. The Monk with the Trunk's only like $1 right now, and we've got to play all 4. You know, this is sort of another Anthem effect. It gives counters to whatever convoked it into play, and in some ways that can be just as good as Benalish Marshall or better. You know, Benalish Marshall, kind of a fragile dude. It's only got the 3 toughness. Lightning Strike kills it. Deafening Clarion kills it and the rest of your team, and that can be a real issue some of the times, you know. So with Venerated Loxodon, sure, Deafening Clarion will still wipe out most of your team, even what convoked it into play, but it survives Deafening Clarion, and that can be huge some of the time. So this is actually the biggest creature in the deck, all things considered. And with creatures like Benalish Marshall out, it only gets even better. So this can just be a huge swinging creature that also, for all intents and purposes, anthems most of the rest of your team. Now, if you're counting, that was 35 creatures, but we've actually still got room for some spells in this deck, believe it or not. We're going to play 4 copies of Conclave Tribunal. This can just be free in this deck all the time, too. You know, with 35 creatures in the deck, it's really not too hard to cast this for free and still attack with some stuff that turn. So, it's just a catch-all answer. You know, it deals with stuff way bigger than our deck would usually have any business dealing with. You know, Lyra Dawnbringer, Doom Whisperer, creatures that are just enormous. Rekindling Phoenix, stuff that would usually just stop us in our tracks. This can take care of for sometimes as low as free, but very often just 2 or 3 mana, which is still a rate we're very much willing to pay. Oh, and by the way, it also stops stuff like Experimental Frenzy that would give other aggro decks a pretty clear advantage over us in the card advantage department. So it's important for that as well. Conclave Tribunal is just, again, if we're going to play any non-creature spell in the entire deck, full playset of this, I think, is the most important thing. And then it kind of gets iffy. We've got a lot of different choices for how to fill these last couple of slots. I'm going to let you go, Ziggy. Let me put you off this way. Did you notice how huge he is? A big cat. As big as I am, and I'm fat. But we've got a few choices for this slot, but I think the way I'll fill it is by playing 2 copies of Charge. Now, very often, this slot would be filled by Pride of Conquerors. But again, I'm not leaning too much on Ascend in this deck. We actually want to win the game just before Ascend becomes a real, you know, a thing. Getting turn permanents is really tough in a deck that doesn't play that many lands, doesn't play Legion's Landing or like Saproling Migration or a card like that gives us multiple permanents at the same time. It can be sort of difficult to get Ascend until the very late game in this deck. So I just didn't want to lean too much on Pride, but Charge is still a decent card, actually. This can protect a Benalish Marshall from a Deafening Clarion some of the time. That can be an important thing. This protects your entire team from a Goblin Chainwhirler at instant speed. That's also very good. And it's just it's a pump spell. You know, 1 mana that allows you to spend your mana really efficiently in a turn. And still get this play in, you know, and just being able to give like 4 creatures +1/+1 for 1 mana is actually huge. So sometimes this will just help you Alpha Strike. But there's all kinds of uses for it, you know. Sometimes it'll protect a Rustwing Falcon from a shock. It gets as tech as that. But there's also like protecting a Venerated Loxodon from a Lava Coil. That also comes up occasionally. So there are lots of ways to use this card. Here's mana base. 19 lands. Again, I've seen decks on as few as 16 lands, but they didn't play any 3-drops or anything. And I've seen decks on 18 lands that still play Banalish Marshal. I've seen a couple of decks that play Flower Flourish just for the flower half to, thin their mana base and act as another land. It's only 1 mana, right? But I think 19 lands is probably the best way to do this. I want to be relatively consistent. The deck can operate off of 2 lands, but you really need that third for Banalish Marshal, and I don't think we need to go up to 20, considering, again, we're playing 23 1-drops here. I mean, aside from Marshal, we really don't need 3 lands in a game most of the time, but because we are playing Marshal, I think 19 is probably the right call. Now here's the sideboard right here, and there's actually kind of a lot to the sideboard for a budget aggro deck, We've got Demotion in there, mostly to deal with big creatures that we don't have a Conclave Tribunal for at any given time. This can just, make an Aurelia not be able to block, and that can sometimes be really important when we're just trying to get damage through. For just 1 mana, it's a good deal. Same thing with Righteous Blow. The reason this is in there, you guys, is for the Arclight Phoenix decks. This kills an Arclight Phoenix, and yeah, it just puts it right back in the graveyard, but sometimes it can be tough for them to get it back, and just for 1 mana, killing an Arclight is a big deal, but obviously this is good in the mono red aggro matchups, which we're not seeing as much of, but they're still out there. In aggro mirrors, Righteous Blow is a decent card for getting up on board. Sure, it's just a 1-for-1 thing, but it still kills the majority of their creature suite for just 1 mana, and it's good to have a card that's able to do that. As far as other removal elements on the board, we're also playing a Baffling End. This is mostly to have a 5th answer to Wild Growth Walker. Obviously, Demotion, Righteous Blow don't really do much against it. Sure, they keep it from blocking, Demotion does, but it doesn't keep it from gaining life or anything. We need another answer. I'm just going to pack 1 Baffling End to be able to do that, but obviously, Baffling End is another card that has a lot of play against a bunch of different stuff. Adanto Vanguard's another good example. And I'm playing 2 Bounty Agent. You'll sometimes see this in the main deck of Mono White Aggro nowadays, and I understand why. Against decks that carry Lyra Dawnbringer and Aurelia and Shalai, this can be a really important card to have, especially against Lyra. Let me say her name one more time, because having Bounty Agent against her is a big, big deal for this deck. We have effectively 6 answers for her, because Demotion doesn't really count as an answer for Lyra. She'll just keep attacking and gaining life. So we need something to deal with her, and this gives us a total of 6 answers to her, and that's important enough. But this can also take out a bevy of other, legendary creatures in the format. But it can also take out Search for Azcanta, too. That can be very relevant on occasion, so keep that in mind. But we're also playing 3 copies of Sheltering Light in the deck. Don't see that every day, but this is kind of our Blossoming Defense. This is very good against the majority of the removal in the format. So if we're playing against Control or something like that, or even decks with a lot of Cleansing Novas, Deafening Clarions, then Sheltering Light can be fantastic, actually, against those lists. So, looks crazy, but I'm carrying 3 copies of this because it's actually great to have a 1-mana spell that not only keeps a creature on board, it's basically a counter spell in that way, but it can also help a creature not die in a combat interaction, and the Scry is especially important in a mono-white aggro deck that wants to fix its draws in any way possible. Now we're also playing 2 Mentor of the Meek. This is against Control as well. This draws us cards. It is very killable, but it draws us cards, and that's all we care about. If this just draws us 1 or 2 extra cards over the course of a game, it has more than done its job. Same thing with Dawn of Hope, including 2 copies of this, and this is very good with all the incidental life gain in the deck. There are 12 different cards just in the 1-drop suite that gain us life in one way or another, so they can all be very good with Dawn of Hope, but by the time we actually get that 4th land down, Dawn of Hope just fuels itself and ends up drawing us a bunch of cards and is much harder to remove than a card like Mentor of the Meek. All I'm saying is don't sleep on Dawn of Hope. It's a good card, you guys. I'm actually thinking it might be a decent main deck card in some builds. I've been wanting to brew around Dawn of Hope for a while now. I just haven't done it yet. But in any case, let's move on to a bunch of cards here that you could play if you wanted to add money to the deck, or even some sort of side grades that I didn't play but heavily considered. And as far as upgrades, there are only a few, but some of them are relatively expensive. Obviously, there's History of Benalia, which, to be honest with you, a lot of mono-white aggro decks are not playing anymore. They've gotten a lot lower to the ground. If they play any 3-drops, it's Banalish Marshal. But obviously, History of Benalia is a great card. And if you had some laying around, I could see definitely fitting it in. It's one of the better cards in the format. I could see playing it, obviously. Shouldn't even have to tell you about it. There's also a Johnny. A lot of decks are packing this in the sideboard, sometimes as a 4-of, to deal with control decks. This not only snowballs and makes your creatures bigger and bigger every turn, works really well with the flying creatures in the deck especially, but it also gets back most of the entire creature suite for what it's worth once they do die to a Deafening Clarion, Cleansing Nova, targeted removal, whatever. So a Johnny can be amazing to have as, you know, anti-control tech, so keep that in mind too. But obviously these decks almost always play a 4-of, sometimes a 3-of, but mostly a 4-of Legion's Landing in the main deck. This will help them get Ascend if they care about Pride of Conquerors, which more and more they don't. A lot of these mono white aggro decks have come off of Pride of Conquerors, but for what it's worth, they still play Legion's Landing because this is a great long game card. Once you are able to flip it over, and it's extremely easy to do so in this deck, this can be great against mid-range and control, and it's another way to gain life too. So that's also important some of the time. If you've got the $5 or $6 a pop that it takes to play this card, play the playset. Now, going down a peg on the budget, I'm a little surprised that Remorseful Cleric hasn't shown up in any of these lists yet. Not even in the sideboard of any mono white aggro deck that I've seen. Maybe I've missed it somewhere, but I haven't remembered seeing it. Which is crazy, because this looks really good against not only the Golgari matchups, but also the Arclight Phoenix decks that are becoming more and more prevalent. Just removing all their Phoenixes when they get a couple in there looks like a good play to me. And you've got yourself another flying creature with 2 power in the meantime. So I could see Remorseful Cleric going in. It's only like $2 right now. Takali Honor Guard, however, is almost always in the board of these decks, mostly against the green-black decks, Golgari decks. This basically invalidates most of their creature suite, but it's gotten up to like $3 now, and I didn't want to spend $12 on a playset. That said, $12 isn't that much to ask when you really think about it. So, you know, even though it's more than half the cost of the deck by itself, I think the playset's definitely worth playing if you want to make this deck a little bit more competitive. Which isn't to say there aren't other options at the 2-drop slot. Obviously, there's Knight of Grace, which could at least be in the sideboard against black decks. That seems obvious. But there's also Silverbeak Griffin, which is a common that's like a $1.50 now, because it's being played in some of these mono white aggro decks. It's crazy that it's so much, but it's harder to get, definitely. But that said, you know, if you want a deck that more focuses on flyers, Silverbeak Griffin is a good card. You could do a lot worse. But if you want to get really cheap with it, there's also Sunhome Stalwart. You know, this is like 5-10 cents right now, and it's really good with like Healer's Hawk and Rustwing Falcon, Hunted Witness, and a lot of different stuff. So this is another 2-drop that if you really didn't want to spend any money on the deck, could actually be pretty decent. And I've seen Gird for Battle as well in these mostly flyers lists that play like Silverbeak, Rustwing, Healer's Hawk, Duskborn, you know, in these mostly mono white skies decks. Gird for Battle looks like a very, very good card that makes your Healer's Hawks and Falcons just way better immediately for just the 1 mana. So that's probably worth playing. But finally, I promise, a card that I considered playing, and I'm still considering playing, but I didn't quite have the guts to pull the trigger on, was a Prying Blade. Mostly, at first, as a joke, you know, with all the birds in the deck, I wanted to include Prying Blade and call this deck like Standard Call Blade. That would have been some views, but you know, the choice was good deck or clickbait titles, you know, and I'll always go with good deck in that case. So I didn't try out Prying Blade, but I actually do have some ideas that this could be a decent card. You know, it's just 1 mana. It does cost 2 to equip, and that's why I didn't play it, because I don't like that. But if you do get it equipped, it gives a creature a power boost, a flying creature a power boost, which can be important, and it just gives you, you know, treasures, which is kind of a way to decrease the land count. You know, I think that this is theory crafting, but you might be able to get the deck down to 15 or 16 lands if you didn't play Benalish Marshal and did play Prying Blade. Then you wouldn't have to play like any lands in that situation, but you would have to play enough lands to get the 2 lands to equip it in the first place. So there was a little bit of a problem with that philosophy, but what started as a joke, I think actually turned into a real theory. I want to try this card out, but again, haven't had the courage to do it yet. And here are your power rankings. A final score of 6 to 60 points, you guys. That's a fairly high score for a really low budget deck. Again, only $20 to build this thing, except for the basics. I never count the basic lands. You know, it's only like $20 to build the main deck and sideboard of this deck. And it's actually it's a deck that performs. You know, a lot of versions of this deck have shown up online already. It's infinitely customizable. I just gave you a bunch of different cards you could play, and there's even more I didn't mention, just so you know. So there's just so many ways to build it. It's a versatile deck in that way, but it's not a versatile deck once it actually starts playing games. You know, mostly the plan here is to just, you know, steamroll the opponent with an explosive start, and then make our guys a little bit bigger with Benalish Marshal, Venerated Loxodon to finish off the game and put things away. And that way we're really consistent, We're going to execute that plan in just about every single game, but we're not versatile at all. We're lacking in resiliency as well. Even though things like Marshall and Venerated Loxodon can give us some resiliency, Hunted Witness is obviously a resilient card. We've got some life gain in the deck. We're just not very resilient overall. If we get swept, we're in real trouble, so you have to play around those sweepers. Don't overextend, play smart. You know, Aggro gets the reputation of being a dumb deck, but you got to play this dumb deck really, really smart some of the time. So again, watch out for sweepers. That said, though, the deck can just win games out of nowhere sometimes because of incredibly explosive starts that punish opponents that have to mulligan down to 5 or 6, or opponents that get, 2 land starts and never draw that 3rd land. This really, really punishes opponents who stumble in the early game or who take some time to really establish their plan. We're gonna win those games. Again, this deck just has one of the best game ones in the format. It's only like $20, but even fully powered up, the deck is like $150. And that's only if you play, History of Benalia and stuff. You don't even have to do that. Just if you wanted to include Legion's Landings and even like Remorseful Clerics, Tocatli Honor Guards in the sideboard and stuff, the deck only gets up to like $75-$80, I think it is. So even with a relatively full power suite, the deck is cheap to play, but this is about as cheap as we can possibly get it, and it's still going to win you tons and tons of game ones especially. So give this thing a shot if you possibly can, and if you're interested in doing so, as always, click the first link in the description. That'll take you over to the deck list on TCG Player. They help put my content out to keep the lights on around here and stuff. They're good to you, man. So go over there, click the link in the description, pick up any pieces you need from them, because they are the cheapest place you're going to get this deck on all of the interwebs. So do that for me. It actually helps the channel out just when you click the link. So do that. Other stuff you can click to help me out are the like button. That doesn't take much time. Just do that. You can also follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev, or just another click is the subscribe button. You haven't done it yet, do it. Call to action. Subscribe to my channel. You watch me all the time. Freaking subscribe already, guys. But do all that stuff. And there's more. You can also throw $1 into the Patreon pod every month, and I'll let you not only know what decks we're doing next, 24 hours in advance, but I'll also, give you the opportunity to vote on what decks you want to see next. And there's actually a vote coming out as soon as I put this video out. So if you're already a Patreon, go over there and get your vote in. If you want to vote, throw $1 into the pot per month, and I'll let you vote. So do all that stuff. And I think I'm done for this one. Tapped out for now, but let me know how you felt about it in the comments section down there. What I did play, what I didn't play, what you would play, all that stuff. I'm all ears. I read your comments, so let me know how you feel. But in any case, I think that's all for this one. So I'll catch you cats later. Have a good F&M if you're watching this in the hour and a half after I put it out. So, another way, I guess have a good weekend otherwise. So aside from that, I guess I'm done. So I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.